How
The
could you do
notification
this
on
to
my
me?
phone read
After
9:47
everything?
p.m. when I pulled into what should have been my empty driveway.
Officer, I can explain. This is a
Instead, a silver
misunderstanding.
Mercedes occupied my usual spot, and every light in my Victorian home blazed like a beacon against the October darkness. Music drifted from my living room windows, and I could hear voices echoing from inside. The scent that greeted me when I unlocked my front door was unmistakable. Expensive jasmine perfume that had become synonymous with our neighborhood improvement committee meetings. The same suffocating fragrance that followed Patricia Kellerman wherever she went, marking her territory like an invisible claim of ownership. Our committee chairwoman wasn't just making my life difficult with endless regulations anymore. She had literally moved into my house while I was attending my father's funeral across the country, treating my absence like a personal invitation to make herself at home. Finding someone living in your house while you're burying a parent is the kind of violation that changes your perspective on everything. You thought you knew about community and trust. Let me explain how a simple inheritance turned into a war against neighborhood tyranny. My name is David Chen. I'm 43 years old. And 8 months ago, I inherited something I never expected to own. A fully restored 1890s Victorian mansion in Cedar Ridge Estates, one of those communities where architectural guidelines are treated like constitutional law, and committee members patrol the streets, looking for violations with religious fervor. My grandfather had lived in that house for 45 years. He was the type of man who hand-carved wooden birdhouses for new neighbors and maintained detailed gardening journals that became local legends. When he passed, he left me his greatest treasure, a house worth $20,000, completely mortgage-free. After my expensive business bankruptcy had decimated my savings like a financial hurricane, this inheritance felt like divine intervention wrapped in Victorian gingerbread trim. The house welcomed me with the aroma of cedar and aged oak when I first stepped inside, mixed with that distinctive smell of hand-polished hardwood that only comes from decades of careful maintenance. Every evening I'd listen to the gentle creaking of those old floors settling in, a sound that reminded me I finally had roots somewhere permanent. But every Eden has its serpent, and mine wore designer suits, drove a luxury sedan, and possessed the personality of a tax collector with delusions of aristocracy. Patricia Kellerman, 49 years old, Neighborhood Improvement Committee chair for 7 uninterrupted years, interior designer by trade, and the kind of woman who pronounced community standards like others might say, national emergency. She lived in a renovated craftsman cottage at the development's entrance, lovely in its own right, but nothing approaching the grandeur of the Victorian mansions in the historic section where my inheritance had landed me. That disparity seemed to gnaw at her like a persistent toothache. The sharp tap of her designer heels on my wraparound porch announced her inaugural visit. I was assembling furniture when she materialized, leather portfolio gripped like sacred scripture, looking like she'd stepped from the pages of Suburban Authority Weekly. "Welcome to our neighborhood," she announced. Though her smile carried all the warmth of a mortgage rejection, "I need to discuss your landscaping situation immediately." My grandfather's beloved rose garden, which had flourished for 3 decades, apparently violated the community's newly implemented native plant initiative. The deep crimson blooms that had drawn admirers for generations suddenly represented ecological rebellion against approved flora specifications. "The fine starts at $200 if you don't comply within 2 weeks," she declared, savoring each syllable like vintage champagne. "But this garden has been here since before I was born," I protested, gesturing toward roses that told decades of careful cultivation stories. "Historic violations don't exempt current infractions," she replied, presenting me with the citation like she'd just discovered the cure for mediocrity through paperwork. That was merely the opening salvo. Week 3 brought a violation notice for displaying my garbage containers past the designated 7 p.m. retrieval deadline. The fact that pickup occurred at 6 a.m. and my consulting work kept me out until midnight apparently constituted willful community disruption. The sound of her Mercedes engine became a Pavlovian trigger for anxiety, usually followed by the rustle of another citation appearing under my door like legal confetti. Week 7 featured complaints about my college-age daughter, Emma's study group parking on the public street during her weekend visits. "It creates an aesthetically disruptive cluster of vehicles," Patricia explained, as if students gathering constituted some form of municipal crisis requiring immediate, Intervention. Week 11 delivered the masterwork. Threatened fine for excessive commercial activity because my marketing, consultation business occasionally required client document deliveries. The 2 FedEx packages apparently transformed my home into an unauthorized distribution center threatening neighborhood character. The pattern emerged clearer than my grandfather's antique crystal. Long-term residents left their trash visible overnight, planted whatever struck their fancy, and hosted celebrations that rattled window panes. No citations ever appeared, but David, the bankrupt newcomer with the impressive inherited property, every action was scrutinized like evidence in a capital murder case. "She's protecting her territory," my neighbor Carol whispered during one of our morning dog walks. Carol was 60-something, widowed, with the gentle wisdom of everyone's favorite teacher. New people challenge her little empire, especially when they inherit properties she could never afford to purchase herself. When I scheduled my cross-country trip for my father's funeral, I informed only Carol and Emma. Patricia somehow discovered my travel plans within hours. The evening before departure, those familiar heel clicks announced her arrival at my front door. "Houses like this really shouldn't remain unmonitored during extended absences," she said, her calculating eyes already surveying my foyer like a general mapping invasion routes. "I could provide oversight services during your absence." "Thanks, but I have everything arranged," I replied firmly. Her expression could have flash-frozen summer sunshine. "We'll evaluate that assumption." 4 days later, I returned from the most difficult week of my life to find Patricia's Mercedes in my driveway at nearly 10 p.m. The house blazed with every light illuminated like a Christmas display. Music echoed from what sounded like my living room, and I could hear multiple voices suggesting some kind of gathering was occurring inside my supposedly empty home. I circled to the back entrance, using childhood memories from visiting my grandfather to locate the spare key hidden beneath the loose stone near his old tool shed. Years of family visits had taught me that back doors often provided better strategic entry points than front door confrontations. My grandfather used to joke that front doors were for salesmen, back doors were for family who understood how houses really worked. The assault on my senses began immediately. That overwhelming jasmine perfume hung in the air like toxic fog, but underneath lurked something more disturbing: the aroma of my kitchen being used by unauthorized occupants. Chinese takeout containers covered my granite island like evidence of systematic violation, and I discovered wine glasses soaking in my sink. My wine glasses filled with vintages from my personal collection that Patricia had apparently been sampling freely. Moving through my own house like a detective investigating a crime scene, my business background in fraud investigation activated instinctively. During my consulting career, I'd helped attorneys document corporate embezzlement cases, and the cardinal rule remained constant: document everything systematically, assume nothing without verification, and never allow emotional reactions to compromise evidence collection. I photographed unfamiliar clothing draped across my bedroom furniture, different toiletries scattered throughout my bathroom, and prescription medications on my vanity counter, blood pressure pills prescribed to P. Kellerman. The sound of running water combined with what could charitably be described as singing echoed from upstairs, specifically from my master bathroom where someone was apparently taking a shower with complete confidence in their right to be there. I climbed my familiar staircase, each step producing its characteristic creak, until I reached the second-floor landing. The bathroom door hung partially open, steam escaping like visible evidence of invasion. Through the frosted glass shower door, I could see a silhouette that definitely wasn't mine, moving with the casual comfort of someone completely at home. "Patricia," I called out, my voice echoing off the subway tile walls my grandfather had personally selected decades earlier. The singing stopped like someone had yanked an electrical cord from its socket. The shower water continued running. "David?" Her voice cracked like thin ice under pressure. "You weren't supposed to return for another 3 days. It's my house, Patricia. I can return whenever circumstances require it." She emerged 10 minutes later wrapped in my bathrobe, the thick Egyptian cotton one that still carried traces of my cologne. Her wet hair dripped onto my hardwood floors as she faced me in my own hallway, appearing about as guilty as a shoplifter caught with stolen merchandise. "I can provide a complete explanation," she began, clutching the robe tighter around herself. "There was a security concern reported in the neighborhood. I was protecting your property as a community service volunteer. I gestured toward the empty champagne bottle on my nightstand, a $150 vintage I'd been saving for celebrating my business recovery. Community service that includes consuming my private wine collection and sleeping in my bed? Her face flushed crimson, but she doubled down with the determination of a politician during scandal season. I have Neighborhood Improvement Committee emergency authority over vacant properties during community security emergencies. It's completely legal and properly documented. Show me the documentation supporting this authority. She marched to my home office. My home office. Like she owned every square foot. Retrieving a folder I'd never seen before in my life. Inside was an official-looking document titled Emergency Property Management Agreement, dated the day after my departure, complete with what appeared to be my signature authorizing her temporary property oversight responsibilities. This was where my background analyzing corporate fraud became invaluable. I'd spent years examining forged signatures for insurance companies, and this specimen displayed more red flags than a Soviet parade. The pen pressure was inconsistent, the letter formation was wrong, and the D in David contained flourishes I'd never used in 30 years of signing documents. Fascinating forgery work, I said, activating my phone's recording function. But signature analysis happens to be one of my professional specialties. That's when a toilet flushed in my guest bathroom, and my evening transitioned from bizarre to completely surreal. Out walked Officer Kevin Murphy in full police uniform. Not just any cop, but the married father of 4 who lived 3 blocks over and volunteered coaching youth soccer during summers. The same Kevin who'd always seemed like a decent neighbor during community barbecues and school fundraisers. "Everything under control here, Patricia?" Kevin asked, his hand resting casually on his service weapon, like this represented a routine domestic disturbance call rather than him being present in my house without permission or invitation. The pieces assembled with the sound of a safe clicking shut. This wasn't simple trespassing or even garden-variety home invasion. This was organized property fraud with law enforcement collaboration. Patricia hadn't just been squatting in my house. She'd been running some kind of sophisticated operation with police protection and official backing. "Kevin," I said, maintaining steady vocal control, "you realize you're currently inside my house without permission, correct? Off-duty but in uniform with a woman who's been living here illegally while I was attending my father's funeral." Kevin's confidence evaporated like morning fog under sunlight. "She told me you'd given her permission to house sit during your absence. Did I give you permission to be here, Kevin?" Silence stretched between us like a tightrope over an abyss. "Because this entire conversation is being recorded," I continued, displaying my phone prominently. "And I suspect your department maintains strict policies about officers involving themselves in civil disputes, particularly when potential fraud might be occurring." Patricia's complexion had shifted from red to the color of spoiled mayonnaise. "You cannot prove anything illegal has occurred on these premises." I smiled for the first time since discovering this nightmare scenario. "Actually, I can prove quite a bit. The next morning, I woke in my own bed for the first time in over a week, though woke overstates the case since I'd barely slept. Every house-settling sound made me wonder whether Patricia had created duplicate keys during her unauthorized residency. My first action was calling a locksmith. My second was beginning a comprehensive investigation into exactly how extensive this conspiracy might be. While waiting for new locks, I examined my violated home like a crime scene investigator documenting evidence. The garage revealed its own disturbing story. My tools had been used and returned to incorrect locations. Fresh oil stains marked the concrete where they'd parked additional vehicles. My workbench had been converted into what appeared to be a staging area for unauthorized home improvement projects. Not improvements to my home, but apparently using my space for external projects. My neighbor Carol appeared at my door around 11 a.m., carrying homemade soup, and wearing the expression of someone with significant intelligence to share. "I was wondering when you'd discover what was happening," she said, settling into my kitchen chair like she was about to deliver classified information. "Patricia told everyone you were subletting to her temporarily while recovering from your business bankruptcy. She claimed you needed the rental income for financial stability." The violation felt simultaneously personal and financial. She hadn't just stolen my space and privacy. She'd stolen my reputation and dignity within the community. "She hosted a cocktail party here last Tuesday," Carol continued, stirring her coffee with obvious discomfort. 12 people, catered appetizers, used your dining room like she was showcasing her own property. I thought the arrangement seemed unusual, but she had explanations for every question. That's when I discovered my security system had been professionally disabled, not amateur wire cutting or obvious tampering. Someone had bypassed the sensors with the kind of technical expertise that requires significant skill and expensive equipment. I'd installed that system myself after my business collapse, partly for security, and partly because working with electronics helped me process stress constructively. Finding it surgically neutralized felt like discovering unauthorized surgery performed while unconscious. By early afternoon, Patricia launched her first retaliatory strike. An official Neighborhood Improvement Committee notice materialized on my door, summoning me to an emergency hearing that very evening. Technically legal under our community bylaws, though barely meeting minimum notification requirements, the charges read like a prosecutor's wish list: disturbing community peace, harassment of committee officials, and my personal favorite, threatening behavior toward neighborhood leadership. The hearing convened in our community center, a beige rectangle that smelled like industrial, carpet adhesive, and bureaucratic defeat. 5 committee members occupied a folding table that belonged at a church rummage sale rather than any legitimate judicial proceeding. Patricia presided from the center position wearing a charcoal blazer that probably cost more than most families' monthly grocery budgets. The outcome was predetermined before I entered the building. 3 committee members were current clients of Patricia's interior design business, information I'd discovered during my post-confrontation research. The 4th member was her brother-in-law Raymond, who possessed the analytical capabilities of decorative lawn statuary. Only retired teacher Margaret Hoffman seemed capable of independent thought, and she appeared deeply uncomfortable with the entire proceedings. "David," Patricia began, her voice dripping synthetic concern, "we've received troubling reports about your behavior last evening. Multiple witnesses describe aggressive and threatening conduct toward community volunteers." Multiple witnesses? I scanned the room, counting exactly 0 individuals who'd been present during our bathroom confrontation. "I'd like to hear testimony from these witnesses directly. Officer Murphy has provided a comprehensive written statement documenting your erratic behavior," she replied, sliding papers across the table like dealing cards in a rigged game. Kevin's report painted me as an unstable homeowner who'd burst into his own residence, making threatening statements toward a community volunteer who was protecting property during the owner's absence. The creative writing was genuinely impressive. He'd managed to make breaking and entering sound like the Community Service Award of the year. They allocated me 4 minutes to defend myself against their kangaroo court proceedings. 4 minutes to explain why discovering someone living in my house without permission might have made me seem aggressive to casual observers. I'd like to review the committee minutes authorizing this emergency caretaker program, I requested. Patricia shuffled papers like she was performing card tricks. "That involves administrative details beyond this hearing's scope. I'd also like to examine the community bylaw, granting you authority to occupy member properties during their absence." More paper shuffling that resembled a magician's misdirection routine. "The committee maintains broad emergency powers during community crises. Could you cite the specific bylaw number supporting this authority?" The silence extended longer than a congressional recess. Finally, brother-in-law Raymond spoke up with the intellectual authority of a decorative garden gnome. "We don't need to justify our legitimate authority to you." That moment clarified that this wasn't about bylaws, regulations, or legitimate authority. This was about raw power exercised without accountability. My corporate consulting experience had taught me that institutional bullies depend on victims being too intimidated or uninformed to mount effective resistance. They count on people not understanding their rights or lacking resources to defend themselves properly. The vote proceeded 4-1 to fine me $2,000 for harassment of community officials. Margaret cast the lone dissenting vote, bless her principled heart. They also imposed a $750 monthly monitoring fee until I demonstrated compliance with community standards, whatever those might actually entail. As I departed the meeting, Margaret intercepted me in the parking lot. The autumn air carried the scent of burning leaves from someone's backyard fire, a smell that should have been comforting but felt ominous under the circumstances. She's done this before, Margaret whispered, glancing around like we were planning a prison escape. The vacant property takeover scheme. Previous victims relocated rather than fighting her systematically. The elderly woman's revelation hit me like cold rain, but it also provided something I hadn't possessed before. Confirmation that this conspiracy extended far beyond just targeting me personally. The following Monday, I entered the law office of attorney Jennifer Walsh, carrying a filing cabinet full of evidence and determination that probably registered on seismic equipment. Jennifer specialized in property law and homeowner association abuse cases, something I'd learned exists in depressingly abundant quantities across the country. Her office smelled like leather-bound law books and competent confidence, with legal degrees covering one wall like military campaign ribbons. "Let me predict the pattern," she said after I'd outlined my situation. "They're claiming emergency powers that don't exist anywhere in your actual community bylaws." Jennifer's first discovery made my blood pressure spike into dangerous territory. The Neighborhood Improvement Committee's emergency caretaker authority was complete legal fiction. She'd invested 20 minutes reviewing our community's governing documents and found exactly 0 references to emergency property oversight, temporary caretaking authority, or any power that would permit Patricia to squat in my house. Her second discovery was even more encouraging. The committee had never voted to establish such authority. No meeting minutes existed, no resolutions were recorded, no documentation of any kind supported their claims. The power Patricia exercised was as mythical as unicorns, but apparently significantly more profitable for her personally. The third discovery made me want to frame Jennifer's law degree and hang it in my living room. Patricia had been collecting monitoring fees from other homeowners for 4 years with absolutely 0 legal foundation. She'd essentially operated a protection racket using clipboards, letterhead, and the illusion of legitimate authority. While Jennifer developed our legal strategy, Patricia launched her counteroffensive with the subtlety of a nuclear weapon. Tuesday morning delivered an anonymous tip to the city building inspector, claiming my home office violated commercial zoning restrictions. The inspector arrived while I was meeting with clients, but my recently reinstalled security cameras, now hidden, better than CIA surveillance equipment, captured everything that occurred. The inspector spent 30 minutes examining my property with someone who obviously possessed intimate knowledge of my house's layout, someone who pointed out exactly which rooms contained my office equipment and where electrical connections were located. He found nothing problematic because nothing problematic existed to discover. But as he departed, he mentioned to Carol that whoever placed the complaint possessed detailed knowledge of my home's interior configuration. What a mysterious coincidence that might be. Wednesday brought another anonymous complaint, this time alleging I was operating a business from residential property in violation of city zoning ordinances. Same pattern exactly. Someone with comprehensive knowledge of my work setup, someone who understood precisely what equipment I used and where I maintained my office space. Thursday initiated the social media warfare campaign. Neighborhood forum posts began appearing about the difficult, new resident causing problems for established community members. The whisper campaign portrayed me as everything from a tax evader to someone probably concealing assets from bankruptcy proceedings. Daughter Emma returned from college that weekend asking why. Neighbors had been questioning her about my activities and whether I was involved in some kind of legal trouble. Watching Patricia's harassment extend to my family crossed a line that transformed this from property dispute to personal war. Friday marked the beginning of Kevin's police department intimidation campaign. Suddenly, patrol cars began cruising my street with the frequency of rush hour traffic. They'd decelerate conspicuously in front of my house, sometimes stopping to investigate things that required no investigation whatsoever. The message was unmistakably clear: we're monitoring your every move. But Saturday was when I deployed the nuclear option of the digital age, comprehensive data recovery. My background in fraud investigation had taught me that most people delete files the way they discard newspapers. They assume it's permanently gone, but it's actually just concealed in electronic storage systems. Patricia had been careful to avoid using my personal computer directly, but she'd underestimated automated cloud backup systems and wireless device synchronization. My security footage revealed a story that could power a Hollywood thriller. 12 days of Patricia entering and exiting my house like she held legal title, bringing guests including what appeared to be potential interior design clients for tours of her latest project. She'd systematically photographed my home's interior with professional lighting equipment, hosted what appeared to be business meetings in my dining room, and used my pool for what looked like client entertainment events. She wasn't just squatting temporarily. She was operating a business from my property without permission or compensation. But the digital smoking gun was even more damaging. Hidden in my computer's temporary files were traces of failed login attempts and cached data from her phone when it connected to my wireless network. She'd attempted to access my personal files, financial information, and client databases. The attempts failed due to encryption protocols, but the digital fingerprints were preserved, like DNA evidence linking directly to her device. Jennifer Walsh's response to this evidence was the most beautiful sound I'd heard since Emma's first words as a baby. We're going to absolutely destroy her in court. By Sunday, the neighborhood dynamic had shifted dramatically. Carol organized an informal information meeting in her backyard, ostensibly to discuss community concerns. 10 households participated, and by the end of 3 hours, we'd uncovered a harassment and intimidation pattern extending back years. Mrs. Rodriguez from Pine Street had paid $200 in fraudulent landscaping compliance fees. The Williams family had been pressured into using Patricia as their interior designer when they'd considered home renovations. Even independent contractor Mike Patterson admitted he'd paid bogus citations for violations he was certain other neighbors committed without receiving any penalties. The information session concluded with something I hadn't anticipated: genuine community solidarity. For the first time since inheriting my grandfather's house, I realized this battle wouldn't be fought alone. But Monday morning's discovery proved Patricia wasn't finished with her arsenal of dirty tactics. Not even close. Monday morning brought the kind of revelation that changes absolutely everything. Jennifer Walsh called at 7:30 a.m. with the tone lawyers use when they've discovered buried treasure. David, we received the court order for committee financial records. You need to see this immediately. I drove to her office still wearing yesterday's clothes, gripping a travel coffee mug like a lifeline. Jennifer had spreadsheets covering her conference table like military battle plans, and her expression mixed triumph with complete disgust. Your friend Patricia has been exceptionally busy, she said, pointing to highlighted columns of numbers. We've identified $73,000 in payments to vendors that don't actually exist. The scheme was elegant in its criminal simplicity. Emergency gutter repairs during storms that never occurred, tree trimming services for trees that remained untouched, sidewalk maintenance for sidewalks that hadn't seen improvement in decades. Every invoice was professionally formatted, every amount calculated just below the threshold requiring full committee approval. But here's where my fraud investigation background became invaluable. While Jennifer analyzed legal implications, I traced the digital money trail with forensic precision. Every fraudulent vendor check had been deposited into accounts linked to Kellerman Property Services LLC, a company that existed only on paper and in Patricia's personal bank account. She's been systematically robbing the entire community, I said, watching the numbers accumulate into serious felony territory. But there's something much larger operating here. That's when Jennifer revealed the file that made everything click into perfect focus. Hidden among my home office papers, the ones Patricia had obviously searched through. During her unauthorized residency, we found her. Business plan for Kellerman Premium. Interior design showcase services. The document read like a criminal manifesto disguised as legitimate business strategy. Her plan explicitly outlined using temporarily vacant luxury homes as showcase properties for high-end interior design clients. She hadn't been squatting in my house for convenience or personal comfort. She'd been operating a sophisticated fraud scheme, using my inherited mansion as her personal showroom to impress wealthy clients who believed she managed properties she could never afford to own. Herself, the dinner parties, professional photography sessions, client tours through my home. Everything was part of an elaborate game to present herself as managing luxury properties far beyond her actual economic reach. The email correspondence we discovered was even more damning. Communications between Patricia and something called Elite Design Management Group showed they'd been splitting profits from unauthorized use of vacant homes across 4 different counties. My house wasn't her first target. It was simply her most ambitious victim to date. But the nuclear revelation emerged when we found her backup plan documentation. Buried in the files was a property lien template pre-filled, with my address and a claim amount of $85,000 for emergency property management services. She'd been preparing to place a legal claim against my house through fraudulent administrative processes, essentially stealing my inheritance through paperwork, manipulation, and bureaucratic deception. Neighbor Carol's background in forensic accounting, something she'd modestly neglected to mention during our casual conversations, proved absolutely invaluable. She'd spent her career tracking corporate embezzlement, and Patricia's schemes represented textbook examples of systematic property, fraud, and community asset embezzlement. The total theft across all targeted communities probably exceeds $300,000. Carol explained that evening as we sat in my kitchen with documents spread across the table like evidence in a federal investigation. She's been systematically targeting vacant properties, elderly homeowners, and anyone too intimidated or uninformed to resist effectively. The scope was genuinely breathtaking. 8 different neighborhood associations, dozens of individual victims, years of organized criminal activity. My case wasn't just about someone squatting in my house temporarily. It was about dismantling a criminal enterprise that had been operating under the protective cover of community service and neighborhood improvement. That night, sitting in my reclaimed living room, the pieces of Patricia's entire operation became crystal clear. She wasn't simply a petty tyrant drunk on neighborhood committee power. She was a professional criminal who'd discovered how to monetize homeowner intimidation systematically. The violation of my home suddenly felt less personal and more strategic. I hadn't been randomly selected for harassment. I'd been specifically targeted because my inherited property represented the perfect combination of high value and vulnerable ownership circumstances. A recently bankrupt man, dealing with a significant inheritance, still learning community dynamics, temporarily absent for family emergency travel. She'd calculated that I represented the ideal victim profile for her schemes. But she'd made one crucial miscalculation in her victim selection process. She'd targeted someone with technical skills to trace digital evidence, financial resources to fund legal resistance, and the stubborn determination to pursue justice regardless of personal cost. As I secured my newly protected front door that night, I realized the actual battle was just beginning. We hadn't simply discovered evidence of local fraud. We'd uncovered a criminal conspiracy that extended far beyond my violated sanctuary. Tomorrow, we were going to start dismantling it systematically, piece by piece. Tuesday morning transformed my kitchen into a strategic command center that would impress military planners. Jennifer Walsh arrived with legal documentation. Carol brought her forensic accounting expertise. I contributed enough coffee to sustain a small army through extended siege warfare. The aroma of fresh determination mixed with highlighter ink as we mapped our comprehensive assault on Patricia's criminal empire. Jennifer outlined our legal strategy like a general planning major offensive operations. Civil lawsuit first. Trespassing, fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, defamation, and conspiracy. Each charge carried specific penalties, but more importantly, civil discovery would force Patricia to produce documents she'd prefer to keep buried deeper than toxic waste. The FBI's Financial Crimes Division wants to discuss the mail fraud angles, Jennifer announced, sliding a business card across my granite countertop. Every fraudulent committee notice she mailed constitutes federal mail fraud, and that carries serious prison time. The state licensing board was equally enthusiastic about investigating unlicensed property management and misuse of client confidential information. Apparently, operating businesses from other people's homes without permission violates approximately 20 different professional regulations. Carol's forensic accounting work had produced the smoking gun we needed. Detailed financial records showing exactly how community funds had been systematically diverted into Patricia's personal accounts. Years of fabricated invoices, phantom vendors, and emergency repairs that existed only on paper. The money trail led directly to her bank account like GPS coordinates for criminal prosecution. Here's what most people don't understand about neighborhood committee law, Jennifer explained, pointing to highlighted sections of our community bylaws. Emergency powers must be explicitly documented in writing. Any fines exceeding $200 require unanimous committee votes, and committee members must disclose all financial conflicts of interest or face personal legal liability. That final point was crucial for our strategy. Every fine Patricia had imposed without proper committee approval was legally worthless. Every decision she'd made while concealing her business conflicts opened her to personal lawsuits. And every dollar she'd collected through fraudulent fees constituted theft under state criminal statutes. While Jennifer handled legal artillery, Carol and I organized community mobilization efforts. We scheduled a homeowner rights educational workshop at the local library, carefully framing it as informational rather than confrontational. The goal was providing neighbors with knowledge they needed to recognize and resist committee abuse without making it appear like organized retaliation. 27 homeowners attended, drawn by word-of-mouth communication and genuine curiosity about their property rights. What we discovered during that session was simultaneously heartbreaking and infuriating. 21 different families had been victimized somehow over the past 5 years. Mrs. Chang from Elm Street had paid $1,800 in emergency maintenance fees for work never performed. The Morrison family had been cited 23 times for violations that identical actions by other neighbors somehow avoided entirely. Even tough-as-nails veteran Bob Sullivan admitted he'd paid fraudulent fines rather than fighting them because he didn't have energy for committee politics while caring for his disabled wife. The pattern was clearer than my grandfather, his antique crystal collection. Patricia systematically targeted anyone who seemed unable or unwilling to mount effective resistance. New residents, elderly homeowners, single parents, families dealing with medical crises, anyone who appeared vulnerable or distracted by life circumstances. By the end of that workshop, we had something more powerful than legal documents, a united community ready to demand accountability and transparent governance. The technical aspects of evidence collection became my personal specialty. Every victimized homeowner received a comprehensive documentation template, dates, amounts, witnesses, photographs, and copies of all correspondence with detailed instructions for preservation. My fraud investigation background proved invaluable for organizing digital evidence and creating encrypted backup systems that even government agencies would approve of. We established secure communication networks using encrypted group messaging, partly for security and partly because it made everyone feel like members of a legitimate resistance movement, which, in many ways, they absolutely were. Media strategy required delicate handling. I'd worked with investigative journalists during my corporate consulting career, and I understood the importance of providing complete stories rather than piecemeal information. Local television news loves stories about authority figures abusing power, especially when there's compelling visual evidence and sympathetic victims. Jennifer filed motions to freeze Patricia's assets before she could hide or transfer stolen money. The legal mechanism was complex, but the principle was straightforward. You cannot profit from criminal activity while that activity is being prosecuted in court. Meanwhile, I began documenting everything for potential documentary purposes. The story contained all elements that make people stop scrolling social media: corruption, abuse of power, ordinary citizens fighting back against injustice, and sufficient evidence to fill a small warehouse. But psychological warfare was perhaps our most effective tactical weapon. I started attending every committee meeting with Jennifer present, politely requesting detailed financial documentation for every single decision. My calm professional demeanor contrasted sharply with Patricia's increasing visible agitation. "Could you explain the competitive bidding process for this particular vendor?" I'd ask reasonably. "Where are the receipts documenting this emergency repair work? What specific documentation supports this fee structure and collection authority?" Each question was perfectly reasonable and completely legal. Each question also made Patricia visibly uncomfortable, because each question had answers she couldn't provide without admitting systematic fraud. By Friday, we were prepared to launch our coordinated offensive campaign. Legal papers were filed, federal investigators were briefed, media contacts were prepared, and the community was organized for sustained resistance. Patricia had built her little criminal empire on intimidation and ignorance. We were about to demonstrate that knowledge and solidarity make remarkably effective weapons against institutional corruption. Patricia's response to our organized resistance was swift, desperate, and absolutely predictable in its criminal logic. By the following Monday, she'd filed a restraining order against me, claiming harassment, stalking, and threatening behavior. The petition read like creative fiction writing, complete with allegations that I'd been driving past her house and intimidating her design clients with erratic and threatening behavior. The irony was thick enough to serve at dinner parties. The woman, who'd been living in my house without permission, was now claiming I was stalking her. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning in the county courthouse, a building that smelled like institutional justice and industrial floor wax. Patricia arrived with a discount attorney who looked like he'd received his degree from a correspondence school, while I appeared with Jennifer Walsh in a storage container full of evidence that could overwhelm a freight train. Judge Rebecca Patterson possessed the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd heard every sob, story, and legal excuse ever invented. She listened to Patricia's tearful testimony about feeling threatened and unsafe with the patience of a saint and the skepticism of an experienced jurist. "Mr. Chen has been deliberately intimidating me at committee meetings," Patricia claimed, dabbing her eyes with tissues that materialized magically from her designer purse. "He follows me around the neighborhood, watches my house, and makes threatening comments about destroying my business and reputation." Her performance deserved theatrical awards, complete with voice trembling and strategic emotional pauses. If I hadn't known she was lying through her teeth, I might have felt genuinely sorry for her apparent distress. Then Jennifer stood up with our timeline documentation and security footage evidence. "Your Honor, we have comprehensive documentation showing that Mr. Chen has never been within 800 feet of Ms. Kellerman's residence," Jennifer said, presenting printed screenshots from multiple security camera systems. These timestamps correspond exactly with dates she claims he was stalking her. The footage was devastating to Patricia's credibility. While she claimed I was lurking around her house Tuesday evening, my security system showed me hosting Emma's study group in my kitchen when she alleged I'd confronted her at the shopping center Saturday afternoon. Credit card receipts placed me at a client meeting 60 miles away. But the nuclear option emerged when Jennifer presented audio recordings from committee meetings. "Ms. Kellerman claims Mr. Chen has been threatening and aggressive," Jennifer told the judge. These recordings from public meetings tell a completely different story. The audio was damning in its absolute politeness. Every question I'd asked was reasonable and professional. Every comment was civil to the point of being boring. Every interaction was respectful and appropriate. Meanwhile, Patricia's voice on the recordings grew increasingly shrill and defensive as I'd requested basic financial transparency. Judge Patterson's expression shifted from neutral to visibly annoyed. "Ms. Kellerman, do you have any evidence beyond your personal testimony to support these stalking allegations?" Patricia's attorney produced Kevin's written statement backing up her claims about my aggressive behavior, but Jennifer was prepared for that strategic move as well. "Your Honor, Officer Murphy was present in Mr. Chen's home without permission when this alleged aggressive behavior occurred. His statement conveniently fails to mention that he was there as Ms. Kellerman's guest, not in any official law enforcement capacity." The judge denied the restraining order, with the kind of judicial irritation usually reserved for frivolous lawsuits and traffic ticket appeals. She also issued a stern warning to Patricia about filing false claims, which felt like an early birthday present wrapped in legal precedent. But Patricia's desperation was just reaching full momentum. The next week brought a coordinated campaign of dirty tricks that would have impressed professional political operatives. Anonymous complaints to my business clients claimed I was under federal investigation for fraud and facing serious criminal charges. Fabricated online reviews appeared on my company's website alleging everything from professional incompetence to unethical business practices. Most disturbing was the attempt to drag Emma into her web of malicious lies. My daughter came home from college visibly upset because someone had contacted the administration claiming she was being neglected and left unsupervised during my business trips. The school counselor, who'd known Emma for 3 years, immediately recognized the obvious fabrication, but the emotional stress on my daughter was real and absolutely infuriating. Then came the Child Protective Services visit that crossed every line of decency. A very serious social worker named Maria Gonzalez appeared at my door Wednesday evening. Armed with a clipboard and a concerned professional expression, someone had filed a report claiming I was frequently absent for business, travel, and leaving my college-age daughter, unsupervised for extended periods with inadequate financial support. The complaint was so obviously false it bordered on comedy. Emma was 20 years old, Dean's List student, campus resident advisor, and more responsible than most adults I knew personally. But I dutifully provided documentation of our family arrangements, emergency contacts, and Emma's academic achievements and campus leadership roles. Ms. Gonzalez spent 90 minutes touring our home, interviewing Emma, and reviewing our family situation comprehensively. Her final report not only dismissed the complaint entirely, but commended our stable family environment and Emma's exceptional maturity and academic performance. The false report backfired spectacularly, creating an official record of Patricia's harassment tactics while highlighting what healthy family relationships actually look like. Emma, bless her resilient heart, was more amused than upset by the entire situation. "She really thinks she can intimidate us with fake complaints?" she asked that evening as we ordered Thai food and celebrated the Clean Protective Services report. "Doesn't she realize we have actual evidence while she has—" "What exactly?" "Smart kid. She'd inherited her great-grandfather's practical wisdom, along with his house's architectural appreciation. But while we were celebrating small victories, Patricia was preparing her most desperate gambit yet, and this time she was planning to bring down the entire neighborhood association with her criminal schemes." Patricia's final act of desperation unfolded like a disaster movie in slow motion. Faced with mounting legal pressure and a community that was finally seeing through her elaborate schemes, she decided to burn down the entire system rather than face the consequences of years of systematic fraud. It started with a mysterious computer system failure. "I'm devastated to report," she announced at the emergency committee meeting she'd called for Tuesday evening. "Our complete financial records have been irretrievably lost. My computer crashed over the weekend, and unfortunately our backup systems failed simultaneously. The timing was about as suspicious as a lottery winner who'd purchased tickets with next week's winning numbers. Just days before the court-ordered financial audit, every digital record of committee transactions had mysteriously vanished into the electronic equivalent of the Bermuda Triangle. But Patricia had underestimated two critical factors: my cybersecurity expertise and the fundamental fact that deleted doesn't actually mean deleted in the digital world. While she was performing her technological tragedy for the remaining committee members, I was collaborating with a data recovery specialist who owed me a professional favor from a previous corporate investigation. The beauty of modern computer systems is that they're remarkably terrible at actually erasing information permanently. They simply hide it and pretend it's gone forever. Within 72 hours, we'd recovered 93% of the lost financial records from her computer's hard drive, including browser history showing she'd researched how to permanently delete files and data destruction software the morning before her supposed system crash. The recovered files revealed the complete scope of her criminal enterprise: email chains with fabricated vendors, detailed plans for property takeovers, and a comprehensive spreadsheet tracking which homeowners were most likely to pay fraudulent fines without mounting legal resistance. She'd been operating her scheme with the methodical precision of a corporate criminal organization, but the smoking gun was an unsent email draft complaining to her accomplice about that fraud investigator who thinks he's so clever. The draft outlined specific plans to destroy all incriminating evidence and make sure nobody can prove anything illegal happened here. While we were recovering her digital trail of evidence, Patricia launched her Scorched Earth campaign throughout the community. She called a special committee meeting to vote on emergency assessments totaling $12,000 per household to cover unexpected maintenance costs and legal expenses. The assessments would have bankrupted half the elderly residents and forced young families to choose between their mortgages and committee compliance requirements. Her pitch to the three remaining committee members who still believed her lies was masterful psychological manipulation. David Chen's vindictive lawsuit is costing our community thousands in unnecessary legal fees. Every homeowner should contribute equally for the damage his harassment campaign has caused. She was essentially trying to make the entire neighborhood pay for her criminal defense while positioning herself as the victim of my privileged newcomer status and unlimited legal resources. The meeting was scheduled for Friday evening with minimal advance notice and maximum pressure tactics, but our community network was completely ready. 47 homeowners showed up to that meeting. a record attendance that transformed the community center into standing room only. The atmosphere was tense but determined, like citizens gathering to address government corruption. The smell of tension mixed with Carol's homemade brownies, which she'd brought because confronting criminal activity works better on satisfied stomachs. Elderly Margaret Hoffman, now fully awakened to Patricia's systematic tactics, stood up with a voice that could have shattered crystal glassware. I moved to immediately remove Patricia Kellerman from the Committee for Financial Misconduct, breach of fiduciary duty, and violation of community trust. The vote was swift and decisive, 5-0 to remove Patricia from her position, with even her brother-in-law Raymond finally abandoning ship when presented with overwhelming evidence. Raymond himself was voted off the committee 15 minutes later for failing to exercise proper oversight of obvious financial irregularities. But Patricia's public humiliation wasn't complete yet. As she gathered her papers and prepared to storm out in defeated fury, FBI Special Agent Carmen Rodriguez walked through the community center doors with the kind of authoritative presence that makes guilty people confess immediately. "Ms. Kellerman," Agent Rodriguez said, her voice carrying the full weight of federal law enforcement, "we have warrants for your arrest on charges of mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, and violation of federal racketeering statutes." The handcuffs clicked with the finality of justice finally served. As Patricia was led away in federal custody, she made one last desperate attempt to maintain her victim narrative for the assembled crowd. "This is all his fault," she shouted, pointing directly at me. "He's destroyed our entire community with his vindictive lies and wealthy, privileged lawsuits." The 47 homeowners who'd gathered to witness her downfall remained completely silent as federal agents escorted her to their unmarked sedan. The only sound was the autumn wind rustling through oak trees that had watched over our neighborhood for decades before Patricia's reign of terror ever began. Emma, who'd been sitting quietly in the back row finishing homework during the dramatic proceedings, looked up from her economics textbook and said, "Well, that was certainly theatrical." The understatement of the decade, delivered with the dry humor she'd inherited from her great-grandfather's practical wisdom. In the parking lot afterward, neighbors lingered longer than usual, as if nobody wanted to end this moment of collective vindication and community healing. Carol organized an impromptu block party for the following weekend to celebrate new beginnings and transparent governance. For the first time in months, people were genuinely excited about community activities and neighborhood involvement. But as satisfying as Patricia's arrest was for immediate justice, the real victory was what happened next. A neighborhood that had been divided by fear and systematic intimidation came together to rebuild something better and stronger than what they'd lost. 6 weeks later, the Cedar Ridge Estates controversy had evolved beyond a simple neighborhood dispute into a comprehensive municipal scandal. The city council called special hearings on neighborhood association reform legislation, and the packed auditorium felt like the scene of a democratic revolution conducted with parliamentary procedures and official name tags. Every seat was occupied with residents, reporters, city officials, and curious observers who'd followed the story through extensive local news coverage, the smell of civic engagement mixed with institutional coffee that flows through government buildings like bureaucratic oxygen. I was scheduled to testify about the urgent need for stronger neighborhood association oversight laws, but Patricia had different plans entirely. Despite being out on federal bail and facing serious criminal charges, she'd convinced her new attorney, a slick character who looked like he charged premium rates for every syllable, to let her mount one final public relations offensive. Her strategy was classic criminal playbook: position herself as the innocent victim of a wealthy newcomer's vindictive harassment campaign designed to destroy a dedicated community volunteer. She approached the podium first, wearing a navy dress that probably cost more than most families' monthly utility bills, and delivered a performance that deserved its own television special. "I've dedicated 9 years of my life to serving this community selflessly," she began, her voice trembling with practiced emotional manipulation. "I've volunteered countless hours, protected property values, and maintained the high standards that make Cedar Ridge Estates the desirable neighborhood it remains today." The audience was initially quiet, some even appearing sympathetic to her apparent plight. She'd always possessed exceptional manipulation skills, and this represented her masterpiece performance. Now I'm being systematically targeted by a vindictive newcomer who couldn't accept reasonable community guidelines and standards, she continued, building toward her emotional crescendo. David Chen has used his wealth and professional connections to destroy my reputation, my business, and my entire life over simple misunderstandings about legitimate property management procedures. Several people nodded along supportively. Her victim narrative was genuinely compelling if you didn't possess knowledge of the actual facts. She'd always been remarkably talented at making systematic fraud sound like dedicated community service. Then she made the critical mistake that destroyed everything she'd built. "I have never done anything illegal, unethical, or inappropriate," she declared, her voice rising with righteous indignation that echoed through the auditorium. "Every single action I took was designed to protect our community's interests and preserve property values for everyone's benefit." That's when I stood up and requested permission from the moderator to present contradicting evidence. "Before we continue with this testimony," I said, walking to the front of the room with my laptop and presentation remote, "I believe everyone should see what Ms. Kellerman's community protection actually looked like in practice." The first video clip appeared on the large screen behind the podium. Security footage of Patricia hosting an elaborate dinner party in my dining room, complete with professional catering and what clearly appeared to be potential interior design clients touring my house like it was her personal showcase property. The auditorium fell completely silent except for audio from my security system, capturing Veronica's voice bragging to her guests about managing this beautiful property and the exclusive nature of our community's luxury home portfolio. The second clip showed her systematically searching through my personal papers in my home office, photographing confidential documents with her phone. The third clip captured her coaching Kevin on intimidation tactics for homeowners who ask too many questions about fees and violations. But the nuclear option was recovered audio from her crashed computer, a phone conversation, where she explicitly discussed using vacant luxury homes as showcase properties for her design business, complete with her laughing about that fraud investigator who thinks he's so smart with his computer skills. The audience reaction shifted from sympathy to outrage in real time, like watching a political rally change directions mid-speech. Murmurs of disbelief transformed into angry whispers, then open expressions of disgust and betrayal. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, advancing to financial evidence slides, "this represents $127,000 in documented fraud across multiple neighborhood associations, emergency repairs that never occurred, vendors that don't exist, and fees collected for services never provided to any community." Detective Sarah Mitchell, who'd been sitting quietly in the fourth row, stood up to address the increasingly agitated crowd. "Ms. Kellerman is currently under federal indictment for mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, and violation of federal racketeering statutes. The FBI investigation has identified victims across 9 different communities spanning 4 counties." Patricia's attorney attempted desperate damage control, but you cannot unsee comprehensive evidence or unhear recorded criminal confessions. The crowd's mood had shifted from curious to genuinely hostile, and even her most loyal historical supporters looked personally betrayed by years of systematic deception.